Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Before we dive in, I want to go through the fine print and share how we can work together. Because healing from this kind of pain takes a lot more than time. It takes the right kind of support. I work with people entangling themselves from emotionally abusive relationships, coercive control, trauma bonds, high conflict co-parenting dynamics, high conflict divorce, and if you're at the beginning of the road and wondering what divorce would look like. I offer one-on-one coaching at every stage. If you're still in the relationship, if you're unsure if it's abuse, if you know it's abuse but you're having trouble understanding what that looks like, or what to do with it, I can help you name what's happening, start setting boundaries that work for you, and figure out what you need. If you're thinking about leaving, we'll explore what that might look like in a grounded and personalized way. If you're navigating divorce or custody or co-parenting with a high conflict person, I can help you document, strategize, and stay emotionally anchored, especially when you're being gaslit, discredited, and re-traumatized by the legal system. If you've already left and you're stuck in the trauma bond, or if you've been discarded and struggling to feel like yourself again, I can help you rebuild self-trust and reconnect with your own nervous system in a way that actually feels doable. Everything I do is highly personalized. I don't walk you through a one-size-fits-all program. I listen, I reflect, and I guide you based on what you're facing right now. And some people work with me through a one-time validation call, which is offered on my website, where we zero in on one issue you're struggling with and start to untangle it together. Others work with me on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on what's going on in your specific situation. And this is especially helpful when healing from emotional abuse and also in divorce. If you're curious about starting, I offer a $25 intro call, which if you listen to my older episodes, I call it a clarity call. It did used to be free, and I talk about it at a later episode, but really a lot of people were no-showing to those calls, and that was taking away time from clients that I do work one-on-one with. And so if we move forward, I just take that fee and apply it to your first session. That intro call is just for us to get on the same page so you can share what's going on for you and I can share how I might be able to help. I only take a limited number of those calls per month because one-on-one coaching is the core of my work. Out of all these offerings that I have, one-on-one coaching is the thing that I do the most, and I do it 6 days a week most of the time, 5 to 6 days a week. And so if my calendar looks full and if there's not a time that you can get in, you can email me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com, and I always try and make space where I can. And I may also always have a few openings from one-on-one client reschedules. You can also explore self-paced courses and toolkits at jessicaknight.thinkific.com, including Divorcing a Narcissist 101 and the Emotional Abuse Breakthrough course. I have a documentation course and my new signature program, Unhooked, which is a private podcast and course that walks you through the full cycle of abuse, helps you map it in your relationship and how to break it and how to begin to see what it really is that you're going through. If you want ongoing support in a more flexible way, you could always check out my Substack at jessicaknight.substack.com. Each month I focus on a different theme, from trauma bonding to divorce to cluster B to sexual coercion to emotional abuse to toxic breakups. Those are just some from this year. Paid members get access to monthly deep dives, master classes, Q&As, strategy kits, and I'm working on some more group options. There is also a free option and a monthly option. So please head over to Substack. The link is in my show notes. You also can just search Jessica Knight Coaching and I'll come up. Everything that I create is meant to help. My coaching, my writing, my courses, this podcast, it's built around the one truth that you're not crazy. You are conditioned to doubt your reality, and we want to help you change that and understand what you're going through. If you like this podcast, the best thing that you can do is subscribe and rate the episode 5 stars. You can find me on my websites, emotionalabusecoach.com and high-conflict divorcecoaching.com. All of the offerings that I just mentioned are also in the show notes below. Now let's get to the episode. Today, I'm joined by Paul Colaianni, the host of the Overwhelmed Brain podcast and the Love and Abuse podcast. These podcasts have helped so many people make sense of emotional abuse, gaslighting, and the invisible dynamics that keep us stuck. Paul also runs the Healed Being program, which we will talk about on this episode. It's one of the only resources I recommend for individuals who have been emotionally abusive and truly want to change. This conversation dives into a question I hear from clients all the time, and one that I've wrestled with a lot. Why does the abuser truly believe their own distorted reality or version of events? And how can somebody cause so much harm and still think that they're right? We also talk about why do they double down, deny reality, and make you feel like you're the problem when all you've done is try to hold things together. Paul and I talk through all this and the psychology behind it, trying to understand what's happening underneath the self-righteousness, the gaslighting, and the refusal to take accountability. We'll also talk about the fear, control, and deep inner stories that drive abusive behavior. We'll touch on what happens when survivors begin to question themselves and when they ask, am I being too harsh? And am I the one who needs to change? There are a few resources that I mentioned in the episode, and so I'm going to name them here, and I'll also put them in the show notes. My Boundaries Deep Dive helps you understand, define, and hold boundaries, especially when the other person keeps crossing the line. And I also offer one-on-one validation calls if you're in the fog and need help sorting through what's real, what's manipulative, and what you actually need. This episode is for you if you've ever felt emotionally erased, confused, guilted, and I really hope it brings you clarity, some new language, and the validation that you need. Paul's Mean Workbook is a extremely valuable resource, and the link to that is in my show notes too. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining me again.
As always, it's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Can you share who you are and what you do?
Oh, that's a deep question.
I know. Yeah.
I've been hosting 2 podcasts for a while now, The Overwhelmed Brain since 2013, and that's about navigating through life's challenges, and Love and Abuse, which is more in your territory here, about emotionally abusive and controlling and manipulative relationships. I've been doing that since 2019, and I run a couple programs. I offer things to help both abuse victims and the abusers themselves to help change them to create less or fewer victims. So that's what I've been doing, and that's what I'm passionate about for many years now.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking right before I pressed record about, you were saying for the Healed Being program, you spent a lot of time in that program working with people that are like untangling their, or I guess like understanding their mindsets and their way of thinking.
Yes. Do you want me to comment on that?
Yeah. I know. And so like for the listener, so Paul likes to not know the topic sometimes before
this is where we're going.
So it actually relates a bit. And so I guess, and I didn't put that together until like I looked down at my notes. So the topic is, I think that will probably be easier. And then, I would like you to comment a little bit about like that work, because I think it's really important. You're one of the only people that I know that does that work. And when there are people that have partners that really do want to look at their thinking and work on themselves, I always tell them to start with the Healed Being program. And what I wanted to talk about today is something that like I think has been coming up a lot in my client sessions, but it also is coming up a lot like in my own thinking and rationalizing of things, even in like friendship dynamics or family dynamics. But it's around, why does the abuser truly believe their own version of events and their own version of reality, even when it's clearly false or harming someone? I am sure that in the program and when you're working with people, that comes up a lot, is that they're very focused on their way of seeing.
Absolutely. I mean, and just to clarify, you said at the beginning, I don't like to know about the topic. That's kind of like a little thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that because I don't want to be prepared with notes, and I don't want to sound like somebody who's memorized anything.
Yeah.
I
I also really appreciate that one time I had a topic and you were like that, and you came with the topic and we went with that. And I was like, I really love this because it was very organic too. So I always when we talk, I keep it open for that reason.
And I appreciate that. And on any show that I watch or listen to, it's always nice if it's organic and it feels more natural, and it's not like something that you just go and watch somebody on stage performing or something. So yes, the program called Healed Being, it is to help emotionally abusive people heal and change, stop the behaviors, deal with their coping mechanisms, heal their emotional triggers. And you asked the question, let me just back up. I've been doing that since like 2021 because I was hearing from a lot of victims of emotional abuse and control and manipulation, and even victims of physical abuse and worse abuses about, they still care about their partners, typically romantic relationships. They still care about their partners and they just want them to change and want to help them. And their partners are in this, what I would call a self-righteous state, a selfish state. And all they can do is what you were asking, believe their own reality. And that's a very deep question. Like, why do they only believe their own reality? It probably requires like a lot of study, but I can give you my perception and my own personal understanding of it, which is, I think there's very likely a deeper core. Well, I know there's a deeper core fear or fears and insecurities that require them to believe what they're doing is right. And that fear, that insecurity, I often call it a fear and desperation, because insecurity can lead to desperation. Fear can lead to desperation. And if you are acting desperately, you're more likely to do behaviors that keep you safe. And with emotionally abusive people who have walked through life gaining their power, so to speak, by keeping control over the people in their lives, keeping that control to the sense that they can feel like they're in control of their own life. If they control someone else, it feels like they're in control of their own life. And as long as they can keep that control and keep that power over someone else, then they are protecting the deepest core of who they are, and to a lesser extent, what they want and what they desire in their life. And so I see those who walk around and get into relationships and they're emotionally abusive or controlling or manipulative and even physically abusive, sexually abusive, financially abusive, all the abuse categories, is to protect the deeper part of themselves in a way that hurts others. And so it's not just walking around with strong personal boundaries, because that's not how you're supposed to enforce your boundaries, by hurting others. It's walking around keeping people at a distance enough to be able to control what happens to you in your life as the abusive person. So that's how I see it. I think, and again, this might require more study and more thought, something that I will definitely consider going forward, because that inner drive, that inner core that they're trying to protect, that insecurity, that fear came from, in most cases, childhood, where they learned to fear or they just became fearful because they didn't feel safe. That caused them to develop coping mechanisms, which may have worked in childhood, but when they got into their first teenage and adult relationships and they started doing these behaviors, to push people away that are very directly related to their childhood coping mechanisms. It was to protect, I mean, that could be inner child work here. That was to protect the inner child, the fearful person inside of them that is still seeing the world through these fearful eyes and these insecurities. And as long as they see the world that way, they're going to continue to act in a way that only hurts people and tries to control them and manipulate them and create the world they want. So that's where I think that the righteousness comes in. Like, I feel right doing this because it is the way to protect myself. And I also know and believe that most abusers, they feel, I just had it in the tip of my tongue. They walk around feeling that you must do this for me. You must comply. You must submit. And if you don't, it's hurting me. So they have this odd belief system that if you don't do this, it's an affront to me. It's an offense to me. It's an oppression to me. And it's interesting after a while, and I'll stop in a second here, but it's interesting after a while hearing the emotionally abusive people, those who commit these acts and behaviors, say the same things that the victims of emotional abuse experience as well. Like, the emotional abuser might say, if they would only do this, then we'd be happy. Just like the victim would say, if they would only do this, we would be happy. And so they're both protecting a part of them. And I'm not equating them at all. There are different layers and different things going on there. But that's how I see it, is that the emotionally, I almost said we, as a former emotional abuser myself, I used to walk around like that. I used to walk around thinking it's important that I do this. Otherwise, they're hurting me and I don't want them to hurt me. So I'm going to do this behavior. And I didn't think it was wrong. I thought it was necessary. It was necessary because it's not right to walk around feeling hurt or scared or fearful. The problem is abusive people push their unhealed trauma, unhealed pain, unhealed hurt, their old emotional wounds onto another person instead of dealing with it themselves. So that's where the behavior comes from as well, is that they are pushing what they haven't dealt with onto someone else. They are pushing that stuff onto someone else so that they don't have to deal with it. So there's an arrogance in there as well, an emotional arrogance in some ways, for lack of a better term.
Would the arrogance in this case be like, I don't have to change?
Yeah, that's one statement that many would definitely make. I don't have to change. Why would I have to change? There's nothing wrong with me. In fact, in almost every situation with a couple that I've worked with, that I've talked to, that I've heard from, the stance is the emotionally abusive person thinks or knows, quote, knows they're right and that the victim needs to change. And the victim of that abuse says, I probably need to change.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I see that I can immediately differentiate, like somebody you were talking about earlier before recording. I can immediately differentiate, well, you're being abusive because you want them to change and you're not taking any responsibility for yourself or your own behaviors. You're not taking any responsibility for your role. You're not being humble or vulnerable. You're just saying they are the problem. They need to fix themselves. I'm perfectly fine. And I see that attitude and I go, okay, I know where there's a problem here. We need to address that.
Yeah. Well, I think that cycle is what makes it so confusing. And when I was listening to you just now, it kept coming up. I'm like, this is where survivors probably get very confused, because when you said if they did this, then they would be happy. And like the example that we were talking about before I recorded of somebody without much context really saying, can you work with me and my husband and tell him he's abusive? And I'm just like, well, no, first of all, I don't know you. You know what I mean? Like, I know nothing about this story. And even with my current clients, like I would say no, because it's a boundary, right? I don't have to get into all of that. I'm sure people can put that together, but it's, so many people fall into that.
Yeah.
And I had that call today. So I do these one-off calls, validation calls. That's what I call them. It's if somebody doesn't want to commit to long-term coaching, we just talk once. So I don't know, a lot of somebody's story, but I had one of those earlier today and we were talking through some of the dynamics. It's
around what probably will lead to divorce at this point. And but she kept asking that. Like, I think it was about 3 times throughout the hour where she said, but am I being unkind? And then I'm like, I don't want to go into her details, but there's kids, there's schooling, there's jobs, there's emotional neglect from the other side around all those pieces of the puzzle. And it's like, the expectation is that she needs to give more, give more, give more, give more, even when she's exhausted, even when she's depleted. But that's the narrative, right? Because he's saying, if you did more, or if you did this for me, this wouldn't happen. And she's booking a validation call to say, if I did more, would this change the dynamic?
Yeah. And it's a complete turnaround again sometimes where they say, well, she's being abusive to me, or he, or whatever. That person's being abusive to me. And that's another form of protecting, the abuser protecting themselves. And when I say abuser, I don't know if I explained this, but I usually say it for brevity. I don't like to call people an abuser. I don't like to call people a victim. I just say that just so we can get through the conversation. Someone who does abusive behavior, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to call an abuser. So the abuser will turn around and say, well, they're being abusive to me. And then they'll take that as like, they'll be defensive and, well, I'm not being abusive. They're being abusive. And it's a typical turnaround so that they don't have to deal with the hurt they're causing, the pain they feel, even though they may not agree that they feel pain, the fears that they have, even though they may not think they have any fears, all at the deeper level. If they can turn around and push it on, if they can turn it around and push it onto them, then they don't have to work on themselves. They don't have to change. And that is like their MO every single day of their life. Somebody else can change for me so I don't have to.
Mm-hmm. What do you typically see in the survivor, or the person that is being emotionally abused, that like in their language or in their behavior or the way that they frame something that almost shows you're not the abusive one? Because I think for me, I can sense how much they're doing to change even their mindset, to change their behaviors, to look at things, to unpack things. I'm curious if you see something similar, if you see something else.
I mean, you said the magic word, the words that they use, just like when you're talking to somebody who calls you probably hear the words that they're using.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I could do something a little bit differently. Maybe I could do something better. It's a very how can I help attitude. I've seen that a lot. How can I help? How can I fix this situation? What can I do differently? When there's that outline of everything they're saying, like everything kind of equates to what they can do to change or help or show up as a better person. I mean, they're literally willing to do different things than they are. They're literally willing to become a different person than they are. That's one thing I see over and over again is emotionally abusive people. They don't want to change. They don't want to help the other person by changing for them. They want to be accepted as who they are without question. And then the victim says, okay, well, if you can't accept me, this is often, not always, if you can't accept me for who I am, then I will do my best to change for you. Mm-hmm. I see that attitude always. I mean, 99% of the time I see that. I will do my best to change for you. The people who don't have that attitude, and maybe it's bigger than 1%, but the people who don't have that attitude, they're often the person who has gone past what I call the threshold. Like they are done. That is it. I am no longer going to accept that kind of behavior in my life. I'm done. And that person, talking about the abuser, that person needs to change, or I'm leaving. Or I'm staying in the second bedroom for 2 weeks, or I'm going over to my sister's. They are drawing a line. And so that's when I see the change, the shift from being victimized to stepping into their power, saying, I'm not going to let you take my power away anymore. I'm going to step into this new place because I cannot take this anymore. I cannot take it from you. And I say that with a caveat that you got to pick your battles wisely. You don't want to pick a fight with somebody who could be dangerous or violent. I always like to say that because some people will write to me and say, you didn't say that. This is dangerous. Of course, it could be dangerous. You know your relationship.
Right,
You know the
right.
person well enough to know if you say, I'm putting my foot down. This is it. I'm not going to take it anymore. Pretty much how they're going to respond. You might still be surprised, but for the most part, a lot of abusive people, they are in fear, they are insecure, and they don't want to be faced with that kind of accountability of somebody putting their foot down. And as long as the victim of their behavior never puts their foot down, they believe it's okay to continue doing that behavior.
Yeah. And like you said, it's like one of the hardest things is to set a boundary, for the safety reasons, but they typically, you call it a threshold. I call it the last straw moment. Because there's typically, I think, a couple, but then they probably reach the threshold, of I'm done, and something's got to give in some way, but it takes a while to get there.
Well, the good news about that is that everybody is capable of it.
Yeah.
Everyone listening now, if you think you're stuck and you have no options and there's nothing you can do and you have no money and no place to live, I get it. I empathize because I've been there, not in the abuse victim, but I do sympathize with everything else. If you believe that you can never get to that point where you can just put your foot down, even for yourself, put your foot down for yourself saying, that's it. No more BS. I'm not going to take this anymore. Everyone has that last straw. Everyone has that my threshold. Because if somebody, I always like to use this, if somebody taps you on the head, tap, 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 and they keep tapping and they keep tapping, and you say, stop, 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 and please, please stop, and you're trying to be nice, please, please stop. Depends on who it is, but let's just say they're tapping and tapping, you're eventually going to lose it. You will. There's nobody in the world that I know that wouldn't finally grab that finger, snap it.
Yeah, like that example, like even you talking about it made me want to lose it, honestly. Yeah.
That's why I say everyone has it in there. And I believe that when you're in an abusive relationship and you feel stuck and you feel like you have no options, that person is inside of you and they will come out when you've been pushed far enough. Just let me add this real quick. Sometimes we develop higher and higher tolerance and resistance to bad behavior, and it continues so that tolerance and the resistance gets more and more and more. And then you are in a new normal and we have to shake ourselves a little bit and say, this isn't the normal I want. This isn't how I want it to be forever and ever or for the rest of our lives together. And it does help to push that threshold or last straw moment a little faster. But if you know that that's in there and you realize, and this is a question I like to ask, and you realize by asking the question, if this never ever changes, will I be okay with it? If you realize that, no, I won't be okay with it, that threshold's going to come a little bit faster for you, or at least a little bit easier, because you're not going to want to continue taking that tapping on your forehead.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because like recently I've been getting with some clients, I've been getting the question of like, and this is usually with people that I've worked with for a while. So I know more of the stories, like it's not, a one-off, but they'll say like, based on everything, do you feel this person is going to change? And like, I think that question really comes in when they're reaching the end of their threshold, like they're getting to the threshold point, of like, I can't do this. And like, I'm holding on for hope, but like, it's getting less and less and less and less.
I don't know if we've talked about this before, but I talk about it a lot. Is when you answer a question like that, do you believe they're ever going to change?
You know the answer.
You do know the answer. And when that answer comes, there's always the what if that follows it. I don't think they're ever going to change, but what if they see me crying one day and they realize that, that is a bad thing to do and they stop doing that behavior? And this is going to sound cold, but I say, so what? So you say, no, they probably won't change, but what if they do the next day or the next week or the next year? So what? Because all you have and I'm going to explain that, all you have right now is what you see today. This is all you have for truth right now, today.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening today? Because if what it was happening, the trend, right? What was happening yesterday and last year is the same thing that's been happening, you have to predict accurately that it will continue to happen that way, even with the what ifs. Because let's just say that we'll go for extremes. Let's just say that you break up with a person because they're emotionally abusive and you still have that what if. So what? So you break up and you have that what if. Well, what if they do change? And I'm not trying to decrease the sadness or anything like that because it's hard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, they change the next day or the next week, or they start healing, when they start they start realizing that they're doing bad, they're being hurtful, and then they finally understand what they're doing, and they say, "Oh my God, you're right. All this time I've been hurting you." Then you can have a conversation. Then I see, to save those conversations for when it actually happens, not based on what ifs, because all you have right now is what has been happening and what is happening today. And if you break up, if you get a divorce, if you go your own ways, and then the what if does happen, then have a conversation. You're either going to be happy to be alone, or maybe you'll be unhappy and you'll want to reconnect. Great, you can reconnect with them. Or you'll be in a new relationship and you'll think, well, maybe I don't need that relationship. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios that can come up. And I'm not trying to minimize or invalidate or anything like that, because this is a very difficult thing. And I'm not saying it's easy to just leave and all that. These are all personal decisions. But I just don't want anybody to be held back by a what if, because what you have seen up to now and what you see today should be the factors that you base your decisions on for anything in the future.
Yeah.
And that's why some people put their foot down, because they put their foot down because they want this to work. They want the person to stop hurting them.
Right.
I'm done. I'm putting my foot down. The person who doesn't put that foot down is usually the one that the abusive people have to be aware of, that that's it. It's over, because they don't put their foot down. They just leave. That's it. I'm done. I'm not going to even talk to you. So when they put their foot down, if anyone who has been emotionally abusive is listening right now, that's a good thing. They're putting their foot down. They're honoring themselves. We should honor people who honor themselves. We should be happy for the person who's making the decision that's right for them. So if somebody you love or you claim to love, because you're hurting them still, if they are putting their foot down, they're saying, you got to change because I want this to work. That's typically what happens. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they put their foot down and say, that's it. It's over. They can do that too. But if they say you got to change or else, then that's usually a good thing. That's a step in the right direction if the abusive person is willing to look inward and go through the changes they need to make.
Well, and like, I think that's I think the really hard part, because when somebody is getting to that point where they're finally putting their foot down, so much went into that, most likely for them to get to that point, and probably knowing that the person is going to escalate as a result of them putting their foot down. But this is a time where, like, I think survivors really begin to, and I felt this way too, like really questioning my version of events. Like, am I being mean? Am I being rude? Am I being like them if I put my foot down here and say, no, I'm not, you have to change this? Because I think that, like, with because the abuser is so certain with their view most of the time, and it kind of relates back to what you were talking about earlier around that they're grasping to that, like, sense of control, or that need for control of, like, their own self, their own life, from wherever it comes from, so strongly that they are so certain, when, like, we're usually not. We're like, I'm setting this boundary and I'm scared. And I've certainly set them and have been confident at times where I'm like, I'm done. And, like, but there have been other times where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And it's coming with tears and actually uncertainty, because I'm constantly being told I'm wrong.
Oh, for sure.
A lot of survivors actually wonder this question. So I want to ask this, but, like, why do you think that the abuser stays so certain in their perspective on things, even when they can tell, and, like, you're naming and you're saying, you're hurting me? And it's like, either they're stuck on like their intent and not the impact, which drives me nuts. If there's one thing I'll ever stand on a soapbox for, it's probably going to be that. But the other thing is like, they're so hung up on that we're seeing it wrong. Even if we're like, oh my God, like, do you see these screenshots of what you said to me? That they still are very, very stuck on you're wrong.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's part of the emotional arrogance, the arrogance that comes with wanting to protect yourself at the deepest level at all costs. And there's also the accountability factor that, let's just say that the abusive person, and I know this is true in most cases, the abusive person, their only level of accountability is if you stay or not.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you stay, then I'm doing nothing wrong. But if you leave, then, oh crap, I got to look at myself and look at what I'm doing and apologize a million times and beg for you to come back as the, talking as the abuser there. But yes, they have this self-righteous arrogance, and it's hard to say that it's more of an inner self-righteous arrogance that comes out in a way, because we've met arrogant people and they're pretty obvious sometimes, but they seem to, a lot of abusive people seem to root their arrogance in that conviction that they need to continue showing up this way, because they do believe they're right. And that righteousness comes from very likely a deep need to protect themselves at the deepest layer, which they believe that's a survival mechanism to literally survive. I mean, they may not think that way, but I remember when I was doing these behaviors, I was so afraid of my insecurities, and I didn't call them that back then, but my insecurities were fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. I was so afraid of those insecurities materializing that if I didn't put my own foot down and be the way I was, that if those things materialized, that I would be extremely unhappy, very sad, depressed, and all this other stuff, all the stuff that I didn't want to feel. And so it was important for me, even in the face of, like you said, showing me texts, although this is a long time ago. I don't know if we had texts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, showing me proof of what I did or what I said, or echoing back to me what I just said. It didn't matter to the point where I needed to change, because, again, if I was, in my thoughts back then, if I was bad, if I was hurtful to you, you wouldn't be here. So this is just a regular relationship difficulty. This is just something that, if, again, coming back to the words, if you just changed, we'd both be happy. If you just did what I told you to do, we'd both be happy. Even though what I'm doing, which was subtle control and manipulation, that has been happening in the background and the foreground for years and years and years. And when those changes don't come, or when there's a violation, according to the abuser, that shows up on their radar, and there's like a program that takes over and says, no, this is what you need to do. It doesn't matter. It's sort of like, I don't want to name names here, but some politicians, I mean, I'm going to be very careful here. Some politicians will absolutely lie to your face, but they do it because they believe it's for a greater good. It is, the greater good is for whatever, themselves, the country, whatever. But they lie to your face, and they control you, and they control what happens to you, because this is the right way to do it. It's like almost a values and a morals drive for them. And those things are twisted. And I see this a lot, where the emotional abuser will finally start understanding and healing and realize, oh crap, I've been doing this to my partner all this time. I'm just realizing this now. Some people will actually go this far and say, I've just been an a-hole. I've been so terrible. I feel shame. I feel guilt. And when you see that, when you hear that from an abusive person who starts the healing process, that's usually a very good sign that they're stepping into humility, into vulnerability, into admitting things that they believed they were right for all this time. They were admitting things that maybe I haven't been right. Mm-hmm. It's a surprise to some people. Some of them know they're in control and they don't care if they're right or wrong. They'll lie to your face, doesn't matter. And some of them, they've just been operating out of fear and developed this whole subset of routines based on that fear. And fear has been driving them their whole life, coming to the point where you say, where they are steadfast and stand up in their own shoes, believing they are right 100%. And where does that come from? And it all comes back to, again, protecting themselves. And by doing that, they also believe that they are contributing to a bigger picture of their own survival, the outcome of the relationship, the getting along with each other in the relationship. But clearly, their perspective and their direction that they're taking the relationship is very skewed. They're basing it on a false premise or false premises. And so that can really twist. I mean, this information doesn't really help the victim too much. It's like the inner workings of what's going on. All the victims,
it helps them a lot more than you know. I think,
really?
Yeah, because we spend so much time wondering what they're thinking, why they're thinking, how they can think that way. Like, it doesn't really lead. I caution people to, like, in a way, you have to turn your empathy button off a little bit, because you could say, oh, well, they're struggling so much. It's like, yes. And it's not your responsibility to fix that for them, because so many people are struggling on their own with their own stuff, right? Like, I grew up in an abusive home, and I've never been the abuser. I have been in therapy looking at all of the ways I think since I was 16. And so, like, just because I grew up that way, I don't use that as like my badge of honor, of like,
right,
this is why I can act this way, but I think that so many people really actually struggle with understanding why and how they think. It actually helps a lot, because otherwise you're honestly wondering if you're crazy. Like, is everybody else seeing the world this way except for me? And I think for me, the capacity to change thing is very confusing. And I'm always thinking about it and thinking about, like, how to wrap my mind around that. Like, because if I have a capacity to change, and if I feel like I'm always open to that, like when I am with my therapist or with my coach, I don't go into that thinking I'm going to make sure she thinks she's wrong. Like, I go into it like, I'm open. If she calls something out, or like calls out a way that I'm thinking about something, I get really curious about it, and I'm not like, okay, you're right about everything, but it's more like, okay, let me think about that. Let me unpack that. What does that mean for me? Especially if I find myself defensive towards it.
Well, that's a huge difference between victim and abuser right there. And when I see that coming out of abusive people who want to change and heal, when I see that curiosity come out, I mean, it's amazing. I will say this, there's a lot of abusive people out there that are truly good people underneath. And I'm not saying that as a defense. I'm just saying that's what I've noticed. Once these unhealthy coping mechanisms are gone, and they are actually stepping into humility and vulnerability and being transparent and being finally honest with themselves and others, that, this is what the victims of abuse always see in the people, and a lot of the abusive people, is that kind side, that wonderful side, that supportive side. I've seen that in so many people who have gone through that healing journey. And, some won't get there. Some just want to stay righteous and arrogant and be stuck in their own ways and believe everyone else is at fault. But when I see that curiosity come out, just like you're saying, they'll say, so wait, you're saying that when I ask her to text me when she gets there, and then text me when she's there and when she's going to leave, and then text me when she's leaving, that's controlling? and I'll say, just accept her decision to text you or not, and be happy if she does and be happy if she doesn't. That's a very simplified thing, but there's a lot of revelations that come out for people that are going through this. And they start to realize, oh my God, everything I've believed is wrong and opposite of what I felt like I should be doing. And I said, yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
This is why you keep causing people to disconnect and distance themselves from you. So yeah, I'm
Right.
glad you brought that up.
Yeah, no, I think, you and I talked about a relationship that I was in that I was really struggling to see because it was so like emotionally coercive and very very based in trauma, right? Like his trauma and all that stuff. And like, it was really difficult for me to, I saw what was happening, but because of like the cognitive dissonance, I was getting stuck. And then I remember like one of the most helpful things from that conversation with you was really unpacking like why he would have thought certain ways actually, because it helped me not feel like it was me. Like it helped me not think that it was my fault, and if I reflect
Oh, yeah.
even just today about the calls I've had this week, it's actually been a very, very busy week this week. Every single day, I've had at least one person say, "Why do you think he thinks this way?"
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's tough. And, I was explaining some of the inner workings of what I believe about
Mm-hmm.
a lot of abusive people. I can't pinpoint every single person who is abusive is actually thinking the same way. But in my experience over the last 15 years I've been doing this, I've seen it over and over again where it's always about how they could not develop a healthy coping mechanism for something, or didn't have the opportunity to do it, or didn't have the role model to do it, to cope with challenges when they come. And that, when it's not addressed, those coping mechanisms aren't addressed, it gets built upon and built upon and built upon. And soon that core is so buried under all these behaviors that they believe are right, because if they weren't right, then I wouldn't have survived as a child. But they believe that they're right. So they get to this point where now they're an adult and they've set everything in stone. And these are all my beliefs and my morals and my values. And this is the direction I'm going to go. It's, when somebody's carrying around all of that inside of them, other people don't have a chance,
Mm-hmm.
even to think about how they think.
Right.
How does
Right.
what? Yeah, if you're trying to discover, or try to figure out the inner workings of someone's mind, especially when they have all those layers, they don't even know themselves why they're doing it, and they also, most of them don't believe that they're wrong. And so to have the conversation, like, why do you do that? It probably won't go too far unless they're reflective and introspective, which most of them,
Mm-hmm.
people are waking up, but a lot of them, they're not there, which is why the abuse continues. But then you said the victim feels like, what can I do differently? Like, just like you're reflecting when you're talking to your coach or your therapist,
Mm-hmm.
you're reflecting, and that doesn't happen on their end.
Right.
They don't reflect. In fact, some of the stuff that I teach for the people in abusive relationships, and the victim of abuse and the abuser themselves, some of it they will try to apply in their life. Like, they hear how somebody is being abusive to another person, like I'll talk on my show or whatever, and they'll think, okay, so all I have to do is do that. And what they'll do is apply behaviors and think, okay, I'm applying behaviors. This is great. But because they haven't dealt with the inner stuff, the fears and the insecurities and all that stuff, they haven't dealt with it. They're only changing behaviors. It goes right back to who they used to be, or right
Right.
back to the
Yeah.
patterns, not really used to be, but who they are. It is based on all the decisions and all the behaviors that they make every day of their life with and around other people. And so if who you are is all these decisions and how you present yourself to the world, that's what I mean when I say they go back to who they were, because we can
Mm-hmm.
change who we are by making
Mm-hmm.
different decisions and doing different behaviors, but they're so stuck. They're so stuck in that mindset, and they have to continue doing these behaviors. Otherwise, it's going to feel like a death. And they won't use words like that. But from what I've learned, if you're a child and you have fears, you don't know what's going to happen if something comes along. You don't know if you're going to get hurt or die. You don't know. You just try to create a coping mechanism. You try to survive.
Right.
And because you're trying to survive, you're protecting the most scared, fearful part of yourself. And I've already explained, at least how I see it, how you build upon that. And then you bring that into the world. And it's all based on something you did at 3 years old or 6 years old. You're just, that's how you are from that point on without addressing it. And then unraveling that usually does take help, does take therapy, does take a program like mine.
Well, and it takes time too, right? Like, I'm sure you've heard the person that went to one therapy session and comes back and is like, I'm better now, and I think it takes time. Like I give the example, which is like a really downplayed example, but like, for people that want to change their thinking, like me, right? Like of my example, like if somebody said, and I'm not a big coffee drinker, but I think the example helps. Like you could never have coffee again. And like my routine is I get up, I stop at the same Starbucks, I talk to the people there, I get my drink and I go to work. And that's like, I do it every day for 10 years, 20 years.
Right.
One day someone's like, you're never stepping foot in the Starbucks again. You cannot drink coffee. You have to go over to this other thing that's inconvenient and you have to get tea and make it through your day. And be uncomfortable, right? Like that, even for a healthy person, that's like, oh my God, I have to change. Like that would be a big change and shift, and you'd have resentment and you'd be angry. And then like eventually over time, you get used to it, but you might miss how it always was. Now, if you apply that to somebody that doesn't want to make change at all, whatsoever, right? And you're like an abusive person that is so stuck on this thinking, and it really goes like back to like, this is the way that they see the world. Like it's going to take a ton of time and self-awareness until they're able to unravel a lot of those behaviors. And I almost think as you know, Paul, I've listened to every podcast that you have, but
I didn't know.
Oh no, that's how I healed from we've talked about this probably 2 years ago, but that's how I healed from the first abusive relationship. Was I would drop my daughter off every day and listen to basically like, you on repeat. And because I felt I was so gaslit, because he was this kind of person that was like so stuck in his version of reality, like to the point that he would, so say there were screenshots, of something, which he did typically, he'd be like, and your tone in this message was this. And I was like, how do you know that that's my tone?
Right.
Like I responded to you quickly because you asked a question when I was at a red light, and like I didn't reply to anything else because it was a logistical question and I answered it. And then I was like, so how do you know that that was my tone? He goes, I know your tone. I'm like, oh my God. But like,
gaslighting.
Yeah. But I think maybe I'm wrong, but I do think it was from maybe like some of the earlier episodes of Love and Abuse, where you said that like now I lost my train of thought, but it was around it was on the tip of my head. It will come back about the time that it takes.
Oh yeah.
Here it is. If it's going to take a lot of time, is it worth your time staying for the hope or the possibility that they might follow through and change their behaviors? And then if it is where it is right now, like if it's where we are right now, and that's all the information you have is today and what it's been for the last 6 years or whatever, and you are banking on that they're going to change, is it worth for you, where you are in your life, with your happiness, with your well-being, staying for the possibility that they may change because of the time that will take too?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying that on as you're saying my own words to me. That situation, I'm thinking, oh boy, that's something to reflect on for sure. Yeah, totally. Just like we were talking about earlier, all you have is today, and anything could happen tomorrow, anything. But here you are thinking the last 5, 10, 20, who knows how long you've been going through all these years, waiting for that change, hoping that they change, and not seeing it. And so, okay, is it worth doing that again? Is it worth going through another year? Do you think it's worth it? And then what is the outcome of that? Let's just, here's the thing. There's an unfortunate truth that comes from all of this wanting someone to change. The unfortunate truth is I'm going to use these percentages over and over again. 99% of the time, the change comes after the foot goes down, unfortunately. And I say it's unfortunate because a lot of victims of abusive relationships, they want to be able to change while in the relationship. They want to see that person change. They want to know that that person loves them enough to change, to stop hurting them. And the victims will always, a lot of them will say, all I need to do is this and maybe they'll change, or maybe I could just do this and maybe they'll change. They're willing to change themselves over and over again, or continuing to adapt to this other person, when the reality is, and this comes straight from the source, I've seen this over and over again, me being the source of seeing what happens over and over again. Majority of the abusive people that I've seen change only did so when they were facing a real threat of the relationship ending. Mm-hmm. A real threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I've got my bags packed and I'm walking out the door. And then they're like, well, what do you mean? What? And suddenly reality hits them. Mm-hmm. And so it's an unfortunate truth, because it shouldn't have to get that far. That's what most people say. It shouldn't have to get that far for you to change. Why does it have to get this far? And they don't want to take that step because that could mean a real change, a real, like, I don't have a place to live, a real, oh, great, we're going to divorce. What about the kids? All of these things are real. But in order to see the change, do we have to get to that point? And most of the time, that's been what I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think helps survivors or victims, I guess, or both? I guess they're both, right? We're both.
Sure.
What do you think helps them get to that point?
Yeah, well, it's the buildup. The buildup happens, the tapping on the forehead. And I think what gets them to that point, some of the questions that I've raised on my show that we've talked about already. And I think it's an important question to tell yourself the truth and be honest. The question of, if nothing ever changes, will I be okay with it? You have to be honest with yourself. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's just say I said, yes, if nothing ever changes, I won't be okay with it. Of course not. And then my follow-up to that is, I promise you it will never, ever change. I promise you, before you say anything.
Yeah.
I say that knowing that I can't predict the future. You know I can't predict the future. You know that I could be wrong tomorrow or next week, but that doesn't matter. Because in order to get you to a decision point of what you will or will not tolerate in your life, which are your personal boundaries, in order to get to that point, somebody may need to push you to that point. And I don't mean to push, but somebody may need to help you get there in a way that helps you reflect on what decision to make and why you need to make it. And this is how you get to that. I need to do something about it. I know it's never going to change. So I will ask somebody, will you be okay with it if this never ever changes? And they'll say, of course not. That'll be the answer. Of course not. I want it to change. And then, as a way to help them decide, I will say, I promise it will never change. This is how it will be from this point on. Yeah. Unless you can prove to me it's been getting better and better over the last few weeks, months, and years. If you can prove that to me, then we might have a different conversation. But in most cases, if they're in that situation, if they're reaching out to me or you or whatever, they're going to be in that place of, man, nothing's ever changed. Nothing changes. It's always the same, or it always is terrible. It's always this, it's always that.
Yeah.
So if I step in and say, I promise you it'll never change. Well, Paul, you're a liar. Well, you can say that and then continue wishing and hoping and praying that it does, which is, to your point, spending more time doing the same thing over and over again. It's that definition of insanity. You could be doing that for the next 5 years. Is that okay? 10 years? Is that okay? And the answer is obviously not. It's not okay. But I do think a lot of people hold on to hope. And I also think that we need to limit the duration that we hold on to hope, because that keeps us in a place that can really hurt the rest of our lives if we just never let go. And hope is a great thing in certain situations, and hope can hold us back in other situations. And we can still hold on to hope even after we put our foot down, because if there's still love in your heart after you put your foot down, then there's still a chance that there can be something to that relationship if you want to figure it out, if you want to, try to work on it after it's over. But if it doesn't end, then that's what we're looking at here. And that's what helps you make decisions. When I have to make decisions in my life, I just say, no, this is how it is today. It's not going to change. This is how it is. And that helps me make the decision. And if I'm wrong, okay, I'll adjust the next day or the next week. And I know, again, that's simplifying, minimizing, and not considering all the very difficult circumstances that one might be in. I totally get it. But I think one of my passions or tasks or whatever, responsibilities, I guess, is to make sure that whoever needs to hear this gets it in their system so that they know they have power. They know they are empowered to make decisions that are right for them. Because if you don't feel like you have power, you may stay stuck in hope. And again, hope is a great thing sometimes, but it can hold you back at other times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that like I do in my work is because like you said, like there's, on a podcast like this, like there's no way to know anybody's individual anything, but the way I can see that because I've lived it and lived so many different versions of it, I can see a lot of the patterns, like when people are talking, and then work on how can we set boundaries for you? And sometimes it's not a boundary that they're setting with the person, it's just within themselves. Like, because it's like say if I'm always over explaining or trying to get this person to do something with me, or trying to get them to care about this thing, it's like, well, what if we just stop and see what happens, right? Because you're taking care of all the things anyway. All you're doing is putting in the mental and emotional and physical energy to that thing. And that's just like one example of so many variables, but it's almost like a way to see, okay, if you change, what begins to shift in the narrative, where you're not caretaking this whole thing anymore. And so that you feel powerful. Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned boundaries. Like we talked about, like I define boundaries as what you will and won't accept.
Yeah. I like people, that.
Yeah. It's just simple. I just like it. So simple. Or what you will and won't accept in your life, what you will won't accept in your relationship. And some people see it as, well, I don't want to, tell them they can't do this. And I don't want to be the bad guy or anything like that. I hear some people go in that direction. And you mentioned, these boundaries, you said in so many words, these boundaries are for you. These aren't against other people. These are for you. And when you honor yourself and your boundaries and you tell yourself, well, I won't accept, for example, somebody disrespecting me. That is a boundary of mine, actually. I won't accept somebody disrespecting me. That's not against anyone. If they want to be disrespectful, they can, but it's for me. So if I'm in an environment where people are disrespecting me, then I'm either going to say something or walk away or tell them, hey, you got to stop disrespecting me because I don't appreciate it. And I think I've said something like that to people in the past. Yeah. And it was for me. It wasn't mean. It wasn't meant to be against them. They can be who they want because I do my best of accepting people as they are. But some people are just a-holes. Jerks. So if I accept them as who they are, then I have to honor myself and take care of myself, protect myself, and do my own thing. That might be to mention something to them or walk away. So that's, right. I wanted to mention that about personal boundaries. Some people think it's doing something against somebody else, but it's always about you. It's always for you.
Yeah, no, sometimes it's just about real. And sometimes like I go through this with my mom a lot where I'm like, I have to realize and remember right where things are now based on what I know, she's not going to change. And so I can accept it. Right. She hasn't been open to feedback for a while now. She used to be, she's not right. But if I keep pushing against this over and over again. I'm just suffering, myself. But like what I am in control of is my boundaries, my space, my availability, my ability to pick up the phone at times, and my brothers have such different ones because they live with her. So it's much different. And it's like, and they're younger. They, have different survival mechanisms, but it's like that reminder of all I can control in this situation is myself, and I'm allowed to have those boundaries, right? Because sometimes you have to look at it and be like, all right, I don't want to fight against this battle anymore.
Oh, how freeing is that too?
Yeah. Well, it's scary. It's a lot of grief, but then it is more freeing because you're not trying to change something.
It's totally, I can totally get that. It is grief. It's sad. You want to see that person change, but trying to change somebody who seems unchangeable, you're putting all this outward energy into it, and it never changes,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I can't change you. I'm going to free myself of working on that because there's nothing I can do about that, and just accept that that's who they're going to be for the rest of their lives and my life. And if I accept that, then where does it come back to? It comes back to me and what I need to do for myself, just like you said. Well worded.
Yeah. Paul, I really appreciate you joining me again. I get so many compliments on the episodes that we do together. So I really think you provide so much value. Can you tell people how they can find you and just touch on the Mean Workbook? I've been talking about it a lot lately with like my one-on-one clients, because it obviously is a tool to really begin to see what's actually going on in your relationship. So I'd love if like you could tell people what it is and where to find it.
Well, thank you as always. I really enjoyed being here. And as I always say, it's a tough subject to talk about. And sometimes we'll laugh and sometimes we'll be happy. And I know there are people in terrible, terrible situations out there, but you are out there. I am out there. We are doing our best to get the word out, to give you the power that you need to make these decisions, to whatever you need to do. I don't think you or me try to push anybody out of a relationship. We just really want them to have knowledge. We want them to have the knowledge, the power to make decisions, feel like they have somebody supporting them and giving them direction and guidance, or just a kind word, and knowing that they're not at fault here for being abused. It's not your fault. So this is my little monologue. You can reach me through loveandabuse.com or theoverwhelmedbrain.com. It's probably easy with loveandabuse.com. I have a contact page over there. But I do that podcast sometimes once or twice a month. It depends, sometimes 3 times a month. But you can reach me through that, and at loveandabuse.com. Well, actually, let me direct people that listening to this episode or listening to this show to your website to get the Mean Workbook, because you are providing this.
I'll put it in show notes too, so that people can just scroll down and
give them the URL, give them the website, so I can talk about it, and we'll end it there. No, you can say it.
I actually don't know what it is on.
Oh, you don't know?
Yeah.
Go to Jessica's website, and it's somewhere on there.
Well, okay. I'm pulling it up. So if you go to emotionalabusecoach.com and then go to resources, there's a drop down where it has my Substack, the podcast, and then a bit like the national hotlines is at the bottom, but the Mean Workbook is smack in the middle.
Great.
And it will bring you right to Paul's Mean Workbook.
I like to send people, these are people that you have connected with, and I want them to go to your website and connect with you there too. So that's why she has the Mean Workbook as well. The Mean Workbook is something I created in 2017. And it was after I read some books, and I talked to my wife, who was married to a sociopath. And she said she read a book once, and she said, I was checking these boxes. And I said, yes, that's what's happening in my relationship. That's what's happening in my relationship. That's what's happening in my relationship. And so I said, people need an assessment. People need an assessment of what's going on in their relationship. Is it abusive? Is it controlling? If it is, how? What are the behaviors? Can I pinpoint the behaviors? So I worked on this for like a year and a half before I actually put it out there. But it is called the Mean Workbook. It stands for Manipulation and Emotional Abuse Number. It's an assessment. It's a workbook. It helps you understand what's going on in your relationship. It assesses your relationship for the amount of manipulation and control emotional abuse in it. And it's gotten a lot of good reviews as far as, wow, you really made me understand what's happening. And it has been helpful for a lot of people. So you can read about it at Jessica's website, and if you do that, you'll take the assessment, you'll understand just exactly what's going on in your relationship, and maybe get some enlightenment. And you might be listening to this now going, I don't need to know what's going on. I already know what's going on in the relationship. Yeah. But there are some people out there that say, well, I don't know if it's emotional abuse. And is it me? Is it them? I don't know. So that workbook really clarifies things and really condenses a lot of stuff that we talked about today in certain ways as well.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful if you're wondering if it is abuse. It's a really good resource because it makes it undeniable for yourself having a number to associate with it.
Yeah. A lot of people go, oh, I'm 126. Oh, I didn't know it was that bad. So I hear that a lot. And I like the lower numbers, but at the same time, it's very helpful to know just how much is happening. Because like we said earlier, sometimes the toleration levels and the resilience that we believe might be a good thing in life is not good in abusive relationships. So we develop these toleration levels and this resilience, and they get bigger and bigger and stronger. And suddenly we don't realize just how deep we're in it. Yeah. And that can be helpful. Yeah. The workbook can be helpful for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. And I know we'll do this again soon.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. We'll talk again soon. I appreciate it.